For better or for worse, Penelope.
Yeah?
I hope it's worth it.
A marriage contract usually meant 2 families, 2 ledgers, and a lawyer in the room. Being hired to gain £40 and learn to love someone else's coffee order was new, even for Dante Moretti's world. Penelope Hart took the job because her mother's dialysis bills didn't care whose ring she was wearing. She never expected the fake fiancé to become the only real thing in his life. Penny had spent 3 years folding herself smaller. Smaller apron strings at the bakery on Halsted Street. Smaller portions at home so her mother could eat first. Smaller hopes every time the hospital called about the balance due. She was 26, built soft and round in a city that worshipped sharp angles, and she had long since stopped expecting anyone to look twice. She kept her head down over the proofing dough at 4 in the morning and told herself invisibility was safer than being seen and found wanting. Her apartment smelled permanently of vanilla and burnt sugar from the ovens downstairs, a scent she carried on her skin the way other women carried perfume. It was the only thing about herself she had never apologized for. Everything else she'd learned to soften, to hide, to explain away before anyone else could say it first. Her mother's dialysis machine hummed 3 nights a week in the next room, a metronome counting down a balance that grew faster than Penny's paychecks ever could. She had priced out her own hunger against that number more times than she wanted to admit, had gone without dinner so the invoice from the clinic could shrink by even a few dollars. Utterly exhausted, completely out of options, she had stopped believing anything good arrived without a catch attached to it. The offer came through a lawyer in a suit that cost more than her rent. Dante Moretti, newly crowned head of the Moretti syndicate after his father's assassination 6 months earlier, needed a fiancée. Not a beautiful one, not a thin, camera-ready one. The rival family he was closing a territory deal with, the Castellis, distrusted flash. They distrusted mistresses paraded like jewelry. They wanted to see a man settling down with someone ordinary, someone soft and warm and unthreatening, a woman who looked like she baked bread and meant it. Penny, plush and plain and instantly forgettable, was exactly what the ledger required. The contract even specified it in blunt legal language. The candidate should not diet, should not improve her appearance, should, if anything, gain weight to read as comfortable and domestic, rather than groomed for display. She would be paid to be exactly herself. It was, she told the lawyer bitterly, the first time in her life anyone had paid her to stop trying to disappear. She met Dante for the first time in a penthouse office 30 floors above the Loop, marble under her scuffed shoes, his eyes the flat grey of a closed door. He looked her over exactly once, the way a man checks a delivery against an invoice, and said nothing about her weight at all. It was his underboss, Sal, who muttered near the elevator that the Castellis better not think the boss had lowered his standards, that a woman built like this was a strange choice for optics. Dante didn't answer Sal. He simply told Penny, in a voice with no temperature in it, that she would move into the East Wing by Friday, and that her mother's medical debt would be cleared by morning. It was not romance. It was a transaction, and she understood transactions. The estate itself nearly swallowed her whole the first night she saw it, a fortress of iron gates and marble hallways so far removed from her cramped, mouldy walk-up that she half expected someone to realize the mistake and send her home. Cigar smoke and expensive cologne clung to every room Dante had passed through, a scent as constant in his world as vanilla and sugar were in hers. Armed men nodded to her in hallways like she was furniture that had always belonged there, and she told herself, again and again, not to get comfortable, because contracts ended, and women like her were never kept past their usefulness. The turn came 3 weeks later, at a dinner meant to reassure the Castelli family that the Morettis were stable, sentimental, ordinary people. Old Salvatore Castelli tested her without warning, sliding into rapid, contemptuous Sicilian, muttering to his son that the new fiancé was clearly hired help, dressed up for the evening, a fat placeholder bought to make Dante look settled. He laughed under his breath, certain no soft-bodied bakery girl from Halsted Street could possibly understand him. Penny set down her wine glass, looked him dead in the eye, and answered him in flawless Sicilian, the dialect her Sicilian grandmother had drilled into her every summer of her childhood. She told him, calmly, that a man who insulted a guest at his own negotiating table in a language he assumed she couldn't speak had already lost the negotiation, because now everyone at the table knew exactly what kind of man he was underneath the manners. The table went utterly silent. Dante's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For the first time since his father died, someone had made him want to laugh out loud in front of enemies, and he had to fight it down like a man swallowing smoke. Old Salvatore's son shifted in his seat, suddenly recalculating everything he'd assumed about the soft-spoken woman across the table, while Sal, standing guard near the door, allowed himself the smallest flicker of a smile he quickly buried. Later that night, riding home in the back of a car that smelled of leather and rain, Dante asked her, almost gently, where a bakery girl from Halstead Street had learned Sicilian well enough to humiliate a made man at his own table. She told him about her grandmother, who had crossed an ocean with nothing but a rosary and a stubborn refusal to let the old language die, who had spent every summer of Penny's childhood teaching her to argue, to bargain, to never let anyone finish an insult they assumed she couldn't understand. Dante listened the entire ride without interrupting once, which Sal later told her was its own kind of miracle. That night changed the terms of the arrangement, even if neither of them said so out loud. Dante began finding reasons to be in the kitchen when she was awake at odd hours, watching her flour-dusted hands work dough with a steadiness his own hands, trained for violence, had never learned. He noticed she didn't flinch when Sal's men cleaned guns at the table, didn't flinch when the phone rang with bad news at 3 a.m. Didn't flinch. Period. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't shrink. He found that unbearable in a way he didn't have language for yet. He gave the order to his housekeeper the next morning, in front of Penny, in a voice that dared anyone to argue. She is not hiding anymore, he said. Dress her in emeralds, in deep reds, in gold that catches light. Emphasize the curves she's spent her whole life trying to apologize for. Make every person at the Castelli Gala look at her and understand she is untouchable. The wardrobe fitting took 4 hours. Penny stood in front of a 3-way mirror in green silk that clung instead of concealed, and for the first time in her adult life, she did not hate what she saw reflected back. The seamstress, an older woman with pins between her lips and decades of Moretti brides behind her, kept murmuring under her breath that she had never dressed a woman who filled a room so completely, and she meant it as the highest compliment she knew how to give. Penny stood there in fabric that cost more than a year of her old rent, and waited for the familiar urge to apologize, to suck in, to angle herself smaller for the mirror the way she always had. It never came. For the first time, she simply let the silk hang exactly as her body demanded it hang, and something in her chest loosened that had been clenched since she was 14 years old. The validation came a week later, in the low light of the east wing after the household had gone quiet. Dante found her staring at her own reflection again, tugging at the neckline of a dress meant for a smaller, harder woman than she'd ever be. He crossed the room, took her hands away from the fabric, and told her the truth as plainly as he'd ever told anyone anything. Every woman I have ever known, he said, tries to shrink herself. Eat less, take up less space, apologize for existing. You are the first person who has ever walked into this house and been entirely unapologetic about the space you take up. This house has felt empty since my father died, and for the first time since then, it feels full. Don't you dare ever apologize for who you are in front of me again. Penny had no answer for that except silence, and the sudden, unfamiliar sting of tears she refused to let fall in front of him. Somewhere in that same stretch of quiet weeks, Penny found herself sitting most evenings with Dante's aging mother, Rosa, tucked away in a sunlit room on the estate's second floor, her mind softened by grief and age until most days blurred together. Rosa had outlived a husband, a war between families, and more funerals than any mother should have to attend, and the staff mostly left her to her television and her rosary. Penny started bringing her tea without being asked, then bread from the kitchen still warm from the oven. Then stories, patient and unhurried. about nothing in particular. Rosa began calling her by name on the good days and, on the confused ones, called her daughter instead, and Penny never once corrected her. Dante found them there one evening, his mother asleep with her hand in Penny's, and he stood in the doorway a long time before either of them noticed him, something in his chest rearranging itself permanently. The hater subplot arrived in the shape of Bianca Castelli, the old man's niece, thin and gleaming and cruel in the specific way that only people who have never been hungry can be cruel. Bianca had wanted Dante for herself since they were teenagers, and she made no secret of her contempt for the woman who had replaced her plans. At the gala, she cornered Penny near the champagne table and told her, low enough for only Penny to hear, that men like Dante kept women like her around the way you keep a family dog. Comfortable, harmless, disposable, the moment something prettier walked through the door. She said Penny should enjoy the emeralds while they lasted, because soft, forgettable women didn't get to keep men who ran empires. Penny didn't answer. She simply smiled, said nothing was worth ruining a good dress over, and walked away, steady as ever, while Bianca's face twisted with the particular fury of someone who had wanted a reaction and been denied one. The threat surfaced 2 nights later. Sal intercepted a message meant for the family's internal channels. A message revealing that the underboss Frankie, a man Dante had trusted since childhood, had been quietly feeding information to a rival cartel out of Detroit for the better part of a year. Information about territory, about schedules, about exactly when the East Wing would be lightest on guards. Dante's jaw went tight enough to crack when Sal laid it out for him. "Someone close to me sold us out," he said, "and someone is going to bleed for it." Penny, watching from the doorway with a mug of tea gone cold in her hands, understood for the first time exactly how much danger she had married herself into, contract or not. There was a quieter menace beat before the storm truly broke. A single afternoon that lodged itself in Penny's memory more than any of the shouting ever did. She found a small bruise-colored mark on the estate's back gate. A sign, Sal explained, flatly meant someone had tested the perimeter and found a weak point, testing it the way a wolf tests a fence, before deciding whether the flock inside is worth the risk. Dante doubled the guards that same night without a word of explanation to her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Penny understood that his silence wasn't coldness. It was a man trying not to frighten her with the truth of exactly how much he had to lose. The escalation came the following week, timed exactly as Frankie's outside buyers had planned it, on a night thick with rain that hammered the estate's windows like static. The power cut first, then the perimeter alarms. Then the East Wing went dark room by room, while 3 of Frankie's hired men slipped through a service entrance he'd left conveniently unlocked. Penny woke to the sound of glass breaking somewhere below and did not scream. She did not freeze. She grabbed the heavy cast iron skillet she'd insisted on keeping in the East Wing kitchenette, the one Dante had teased her about. Useless decoration for a woman who apparently just liked to cook, and she moved toward the stairwell instead of away from it, because she'd already realized the men weren't there for jewelry, they were there for her. The one piece of leverage that could make Dante Moretti do absolutely anything. The first man who found her in the dark hallway never saw the skillet coming. She swung with her whole body behind it, every ounce of the weight she'd spent a lifetime apologizing for now working entirely in her favor. And he went down hard enough that the second man hesitated half a second too long. That hesitation was all Dante needed. He came around the corner with Sal a half step behind him, and what followed was fast and grim, and entirely deserved. The kind of violence the genre keeps off-screen and implied. 2 muffled shots swallowed by the storm outside before either intruder hit the floor. Penny stood over the man she'd dropped with the skillet still raised, breathing hard, steady, unbroken, and Dante crossed the space between them in 3 strides and pulled her against him, like he was checking she was still real. Down the hall, Rosa's door stood half open, and for one terrifying second Penny thought of nothing but the old woman asleep inside, defenseless against a house full of gunfire. She had reached Rosa's room before Dante even called her name, positioning herself between the doorway and the bed, the way she'd once positioned herself between her own mother and every collection notice that ever arrived. Instinctive, immovable, unwilling to let harm reach the people she'd claimed as hers. Rosa slept through the entire ordeal undisturbed, and when Dante found them there afterward, Penny still standing guard in the doorway, he understood with total clarity that he had not hired protection for his family. He had found it. Frankie was found within the hour, cornered in his own car 2 blocks from the estate, trying to run before the storm even let up. Dante didn't raise his voice when he confronted him. He didn't need to. He told Frankie, in the same flat voice he'd used the day he met Penny, that he had built his entire reign on loyalty, and Frankie had sold the one thing that couldn't be repurchased. He told him that nobody touches what is his, that he would burn this entire city to the ground floor by floor before he let a traitor put his hands anywhere near the woman who had just proven herself braver than every man Dante had ever put a gun in the hands of. Frankie's operation was dismantled by morning, his accounts frozen. His allies in Detroit informed in no uncertain terms that the Moretti territory was no longer available for negotiation of any kind. The twist, when Sal finally pieced it together over coffee 2 days later, was uglier than anyone expected. Frankie hadn't just been selling information. He'd been the one who fed Bianca Castelli the idea to plant a poisoned pin inside the emerald brooch gifted to Penny for the gala. A slow-acting toxin meant to look like a sudden heart failure weeks later. Meant to look tragic, accidental, deniable. Bianca had wanted Penny gone quietly, permanently, and Frankie had wanted the chaos of Dante's grief to cover his own tracks with the Castellis. The brooch was recovered from Penny's jewelry box untouched, still pinned exactly where Bianca had suggested she wear it that night. Waiting, old Salvatore, once he understood what his own niece had attempted under his roof, disowned Bianca on the spot, and personally severed every remaining thread between the two families' business interests, unwilling to let her cruelty cost him the peace Dante's territory now guaranteed. Bianca left Chicago within the month, and nobody in either family ever spoke her name again above a whisper. The coronation happened 3 weeks later. At the very gala, the entire arrangement had been designed to survive, except this time there was no contract behind it. Rosa sat at the head table that night, lucid and radiant in a way none of the staff had seen in years, her hand never once letting go of Penny's the entire evening. Dante stood in front of the same families who had once measured Penny like livestock, and told them, in front of every capo and every rival boss in the room, that the woman beside him was not a hired fiancée, and never truly had been. Not in any way that mattered. "You are not an arrangement," he told her, loud enough for the entire room to hear, loud enough for Bianca Castelli to hear from wherever she'd slunk off to. "You are the woman who stood over an intruder with a skillet and didn't blink. You are my equal in every way that has ever counted in this family. You are my queen, and anyone in this room who has a problem with the space you take up can leave through the front door right now. Let them stare. Let them whisper." Penny had spent her entire life folding herself down to fit into rooms that didn't want her. Standing in emerald silk, with Dante Moretti's hand laced through hers, in front of the most dangerous families in the Midwest, she finally understood what it felt like to take up exactly the right amount of space, and not 1 ounce less. Penny never went back to the bakery on Halsted Street, not because she was ashamed of it, but because the woman who had once shrunk herself to survive there no longer existed. She kept the cast-iron skillet in the East Wing kitchen anyway, polished and proud, a reminder to anyone who ever underestimated her again exactly what soft hands were capable of when someone she loved was in danger. The contract that had started it all was burned in the estate fireplace the week of the wedding. And nobody in that house ever called what they had fake again. Her mother, fully recovered and finally free of the dialysis machine that had haunted 3 long years of Penny's life, walked her down the aisle that spring morning in a garden thick with the warm smell of vanilla cake and Sicilian lemon. Rosa seated in the front row beside her, holding both their hands like she'd found 2 daughters instead of 1. Sal, standing guard as always near the back gate, allowed himself a full, unguarded smile for the very first time anyone at the estate could ever remember, and even Dante Moretti himself, a man who had built an entire empire on never once letting his face show anything, cried openly and without shame in front of every capo and rival family, who had once measured his fiancée like nothing more than livestock. Penny's story proves that the people who try hardest to make you feel small are usually the ones most afraid of how much space you're actually capable of filling, and that unapologetic softness can still win a war. If this story moved you tonight, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more stories where invisible women are finally seen and cruelty gets exactly what it deserves. Would you have forgiven Frankie? Or would you have wanted Dante to burn it all down anyway? Tell us in the comments section down below and let us know which single detail of Penny's whole story hit you the very hardest tonight.